Hello friends, a very good morning. Today we are going to look at the next school of realism, which is called the neoclassical realism, and then we are also going to look at one final school in realist theory, that is the subaltern realism. So my name is Dhanunjay and I am going to take Union Public Service Commission Civil Services Examination PSIR syllabus. I am going to deliver all the lectures at free of cost in this series. So I have started with PSIR paper 2 and that too with the theories of international relations. So this is my fourth class, and in the previous classes we have discussed on how the theory of IR has evolved, and then we have seen the various schools. So far we have seen the Westphalian world order, and then we have seen uh, the New World Order, and then in that the liberal school. We have given brief context on the liberal school, and then we went to the realist school. So today we are going to look at the final classes of realist school, that is the neoclassical realism and subaltern realism. And before going into that, let me make it very sure, or let me clarify your doubt that as far as examination is considered, this point of neoclassical realism, this is not very much relevant because in syllabus as such they have not given, and if you look at previous year questions also, they have not asked much of the questions. So however, we have to understand these two classes. Even subaltern realism they didn't focus much, but we have to study these two things in two perspectives. One is to understand why this school has emerged. This school has emerged as an alternative to the neo-realist school that we discussed yesterday. So in order to understand the criticisms of the neo-realist school, we should understand what is neoclassical realism. This is the first thing, and what is subaltern realism is the second thing. These are two schools that we are going to discuss. Apart from that, why we have to study this is, if you want to apply these theories in paper 2 section B of our PSIR, then automatically we should have a clear understanding of how what is neo-realism, what is subaltern realism, and how the things are evolving over a period of time. So this is very important from the perspective of interlinking subject of paper 1, subject of section A with section B, that is application part of section B. We will see how we are going to apply all these theories in the present context, that is in paper to section B. So this is why this topic is important. Otherwise, from the perspective of examination per se, they won't ask much questions from this area. Yes, let us start the class. So neoclassical realism, and then there is subaltern realism. So neoclassical realism is this one. This photo shows neoclassical realism, and then this photo is of Farid Zakaria. Farid Zakaria. Sorry, this photo is of Muhammad Ayub. This photo is of Muhammad Ayub, who has been Muhammad Ayub, who was a subaltern realist. So there was no books as such. I have given his photo, and in Hindu newspaper, you will be coming. He will be writing many articles. Whenever you are reading the Hindu regularly, you will be coming across the so-called this man, Muhammad Ayub. So these are the two schools that we are going to discuss today. So let us move to the first slide. So neoclassical realism. Why this school emerged as such? As I said, this is not relevant for exam. We are just studying to understand the criticism of neo-realism that this school has said, and how to apply this part in paper 2 section B of paper 2. That is the reason why we are going to study this. Otherwise, there is no much relevance from the perspective of examination. Now, who are the scholars in neoclassical realism? The scholars are Randall Schweller. Randall Schweller is one scholar. The other scholar is Farid Zakaria. Right? These are the two scholars belonging to this school. Let me rewind. So far in realism, we have seen the evolution of realism. In that, we have seen the classical realism. We have also said that the father of classical realism is Hans J. Morgenthau, and the first person to study about realism is Mr. E.H. Carr. Is one scholar, and the other scholar is Hans J. Morgenthau. Angelo Magento has written a book called Politics Among Nations, and he has given 6 principles of classical realism. And then, as an opposition to classical realism, we have seen evolution of neo-realist school. In neo-realism, we have seen two divisions. One is of Kenneth Walls, that is defensive school, and the other one is of John Mearsheimer, and that school is offensive school. We have seen what is the difference between defensive and offensive schools in the previous lectures. Now, as a criticism to this, again, there is one class called neo-classical realism which was emerged. So these are the sub-schools in realism. Apart from this school, we have one more school called, finally we are going to subaltern school. So these are the classifications in realism. So we should know this classification. The moment we are knowing this classification, we can be very sure on what we are going to read. So this is the realist school of international politics, and these are the sub-classifications in realism. So today we are going to see neo-realism, classical and subaltern realism. So I think it is clear. The scholars, as I said, the scholars are Randall Schweller as well as Fareed Zakaria. Now, what are the roots for evolution of the so-called neo-classical realism? Neoclassical realism evolved because of the loopholes that existed in the neo-realism of Kenneth Walls and John Mearsheimer. We studied neo-realism, but there are some criticisms. In the last class also, we have seen what are the criticisms of neo-realism from the perspective of neoclassical realism. So there is some loophole. Now we understand what is that loophole. The loophole in neo-realism is, one, they have entirely focused on the actor level analysis. That is, they ignored actor level analysis. That is, the role of human nature in international politics. They have said there is no role of human nature in international politics. The first thing is, that is one loophole. The second loophole is, it also ignored the domestic factors. If you remember the previous class, we discussed that neo-realists said that there is no functional differentiation among the states in internal politics. Every state has only one function, that is seeking power. Irrespective of your domestic factors, the international situation is like that of anarchy, where everyone has only one function, that is seeking power. So they have neglected the domestic factors as well as they have neglected the human nature. That is why they said that it is structural analysis. We are not giving importance to human nature. So these two are the things that was ignored, and this was countered by the so-called neoclassical realists. So according to neo-realists, irrespective of the fact as to who is foreign policy maker, all the state will pursue same foreign policy. Right? Irrespective of the foreign policy maker, irrespective of the actor who is making this foreign policy of a state, all states will pursue the same foreign policy. This was the context on which neo-realists said. For example, to give a clear example on this of neo-realists, whether it is Modi or whether it is Jawaharlal Nehru, both will pursue same foreign policy. Or whether it is Trump or whether it is Joe Biden, both will pursue same foreign policy. Because here actors are not relevant as per the neo-realists. This is the biggest mistake what they made. So this person says, structural realists, that is neo-realists, whether it is in India or whether it is in China, they will pursue same foreign policy. Irrespective of the actors, irrespective of the domestic factors, they pursue the same foreign policy. Which means, even though India is a democratic country, or even though China is an authoritative country, these persons called neo-realists, they believe that they have same foreign policy when it comes to international politics. That is, they always seek for power. So this is what they said. First thing is, they ignored the domestic factors, they ignored the human nature, they ignored the foreign policies. So these are the things that they ignored. So this was heavily criticized by neoclassical realists, and as such, as there is loophole in this, they have come out with a new school called neoclassical realism. Further, the neo-realists say it means there is no impact on the domestic factors. There is no impact of domestic factors on foreign policy. Either your domestic factor is a democratic country or whether your domestic politics is an authoritative country, that doesn't matter in foreign policy. That was the stance of neorealism. So neoclassical realism emerged. So this is the reason why neoclassical realism emerged as such after the neo-realist school. Right? Now, we will see what are the features of neoclassical realism. Why we call the so-called neoclassical realism. We have seen independently. Classical realism, this was given by Hans-Georg Morgenthau and E.H. Carr. We have seen neorealism. It was given by Kenneth Walls and it was also propounded by the offensive realist called John Mearsheimer. So, right. So now this combines neo and classical together. They combined and they say that we are having one more school called neoclassical realism. Why the name as such? They have combined the features of the classical realism in neo-realism. There were two schools that we discussed: classical school or old school, or near and neo-realism, that is the contemporary school. In this way, they said that we are addressing the problem or the lacuna in the neo-realism. We have seen what are the lacuna or the loopholes in neo-realism in the previous slide. What are those lacuna? They ignored the human nature. They also ignored the domestic factors. So neoclassical realists said it is a combination of actor level analysis. We are combining three things. That is actor, human nature. We are combining the actor. We are combining the domestic factors along with the structural politics of international relations as was given by the neo-realists. So we are combining the classical aspects with neo aspects. As such, they have come out with the so-called neo-classical realism. This is how the subject emerged. Neo-realists will focus, we know, neo-realists will focus only on international politics, structure of international politics. Classical realists only an actor or domestic factors. Today, they are combining the three and they have emerged one new school called neoclassical realist school. Having said this, we will see foreign policy from neoclassical perspective. How foreign policy differs from neoclassical realism to neo-realism. As we have just seen, from the perspective of neo-realists, there is no difference between the country because every country has same foreign policy. That is the first thing. And there is no difference between who is at the helm of affairs, who is making this foreign policy, whether this is Modi or whether it is Nehru, both will have same foreign policy. So from the perspective of neo-realists, what they say is foreign policy reflects continuity. It is continual, which means it is not changing with time. Either it is in 1950 during the time of Nehru or whether it is in 2020 during the time of Modi, they will have same foreign policy. So foreign policy reflects continuity as far as the neo-realist is concerned. Because the structure of foreign policy will not change in international relations as per neo-realist. What is that structure? The structure is, as per neo-realist, it is a struggle for power. Right? That structure will be remaining always constant. As a result, foreign policy reflects continuity. Even it is in 1950, even it is in 1960s, or even in 2000 or 2020, foreign policy reflects continuity as per these persons. But if you apply neoclassical realist approach, as far as these persons are considered, they suggest that foreign policy of any state is not just shaped by the structure, not just by structure, but also by the actors and the domestic factors. That is what we have seen. Neoclassical realism has combined along with the structure, the actors and the domestic factors, right? As a result, what they say is foreign policy of any country differs, foreign policy of one country differs from other country. Not only that, the foreign policy of not only different countries vary, but also foreign policy of even one country vary from time to time, which means the foreign policy of India changes from time to time depending upon the leader who is at the helm of affairs. So, foreign policy of even one country changes from time to time. Not only that, the foreign policy of one country differs from the foreign policy of other country. India's foreign policy differs from Chinese foreign policy. Chinese foreign policy differs from Japanese. Why this difference? Because of the domestic factors. But if you look at this neo-realist, they say that foreign policy reflects continuity. This is the first difference between the neo-realist and neo-classical realist. Continuity in foreign policy is The domain of neoreal is change in foreign policy, not only from country to country, but also within country from time to time. This is thing. Thus, the neoclassical realists represent continuity in foreign policy as well as change. If we ask a thing called continuity and change in international politics, then this subject belongs to neoclassical realism. If you look at our syllabus in paper 2, section B, there is one topic called continuity and change in India's foreign policy. Right? If you observe the syllabus. So they have taken that syllabus from neoclassical realism. That is why I said you have to connect from here to section B. Continuity and change in Indian foreign policy. Yes, there has been continuity, there has been change. Continuity in the structural approach. As far as structure is considered, yes, there has been certain features which are continuing. But when you look at the change, yes, definitely there is change from different person to person. That is, during the time of Nehru, we pursued one foreign policy. During the time of Indira Gandhi, we pursued one foreign policy. During the times of Modi, we are following another foreign policy. Though some principles are continuing with the same trend. So there is continuity and change as per neo-classical realism. I think this is very clear, right? You got my point. Now, this is what up to is neoclassical realism. Neoclassical realism is. So far we discussed realism, the different trends of realism, classical, neorealism. In neorealism, we have seen defensive school and offensive school, and then we have seen the neoclassical realism. So we are moving to the final school in international politics as far as realist school is considered. That is subaltern realism. Subaltern meaning itself says, the meaning of subaltern, the dictionary meaning of subaltern says, it is of the lower rung. It is of the lower rung sections of society. They speak about the lower rung. If it is subaltern history, history is not from the perspective of elites. It will be from the lower sections of community, peasants, tribals, women, or Dalit perspective. So this is subaltern history. So subaltern realism is also having the same meaning in international politics. The scholar here is Muhammad Ayub. Is a scholar. And then subaltern perspective represents post-colonial approach. Why post-colonial approach? As the name itself says, subaltern means it is about the third world countries. It is about the decolonized countries, lower rung countries, not advanced countries or the Western countries. This is about the global South countries. So that is why we call it as post-colonial approach. So it is also known as post-colonial realism, or it is also known as peripheral realism. So subaltern school is also known as post-colonial school or peripheral school. The chief exponents of this post-colonial perspective is Edward Said. Post-colonial perspective was given by Edward Said. So he was one more scholar. He is Muhammad Ayub is one more scholar. Edward Said, in his subaltern perspective, he has given a concept called Orientalism. This is not very much important, but remember that this is a man who has given the concept of studying the things from the third world countries, Orientalism. Now, it is based on, this Orientalism is based on, again in paper 1, we'll come across a person called Foucault. It is based on subaltern perspective, or the concept of Orientalism is based on Foucault's concept of discourses on the knowledge and power connection. So Foucault will study in paper 1 section A about Foucault, and Foucault, he has said what is the connection between knowledge and power. So through these discourses, Edward Said gave the concept of Orientalism. From this Orientalist school, Muhammad Ayub developed subaltern perspective. Now, the essence of post-colonial perspective is that there is hegemony of Western countries even in academics. So what they say, post-colonial perspective, there is hegemony of the West, not only in the social structure, there is hegemony not only in the power relations, there is not only in the economic relations. West is always used to dominate the global South, East. So there is hegemony even in the academics, not only in the economy, not only in society, not only in the political perspective, but even in the academics also, everything was written in favor of Western countries. So we have to break this hegemony and we have to represent, or we have to give a voice to the third world countries who are newly independent. With that aim, the subaltern realism has emerged at the global level. I think it is very clear now, right? Next, what is this post-colonial perspective or subaltern perspective or peripheral perspective? According to the post-colonial perspective, the existing mainstream theories of international relations are Eurocentric, which means West-centric, which are Europe, which are focusing on international relations of Europe as such, but they are not focusing on the international relations of the third world countries. They are written from the perspective of the people of the Western world, and they have neglected the perspectives of the Eastern world. As a result, this school has emerged. Hence, there is need to decolonize the discipline of international politics. So we have to decolonize the international politics from that of West. It means bringing the perspective of third world. Let us bring the perspective of third world. Then there was one more speaker, or there is one more scholar who has questioned this woman called Gayatri Spivak. What she questioned suggests that can subalterns speak, which means where is the voice of subalterns in academics? There is no voice. So she is asking a question: can subalterns speak? Do they have the authority to speak? Do they have their own academics? Do they have their own view on international politics? That is what her question is. So this is what the post-colonial perspective is. Post-colonial perspective developed because the mainstream international relations are Eurocentric and they were written from the perspective of peoples of the Western world. As a result, they thought that we have to decolonize the discipline of international politics from West and we have to give the perspective of the third world countries. So this is the evolutionary procedure of post-colonial perspective. Now, why did Muhammad Ayub want to bring the perspective of third world into international relations? Why these people, third post-colonial scholars, thought that we have to bring the perspective of third world in international relations? Why should we focus on perspective? Is there any difference? Because is the Western academics, are they not suiting to the third world countries? Why we want third world perspective in international relations? So this was a question, right? For this, the answer is the problems in third world are very different compared to the developed world, first world. Or the problems of the global south are different from the problems of global north. The problems of the west are different from the problems of global east. So, especially the problems aggravate when it comes to the problems of security. If you look at the security challenges in the west and compared to the eastern countries, automatically security issues in third world are very, very different from that of the western world. As such, these theories, which are focusing on Eurocentric, cannot be understood, cannot be relevant to understand the problems of the third world. So this is the reason what he says. The problems of the global south are different from the problems of global north. The problems of eastern countries are different from the problems of western countries. The problems of post-colonial states are different from the problems of the colonial masters. So as such, in order to understand those problems, we cannot, these theories, the existing theories, may not be relevant to understand the problems of third world. What are those security challenges? In Western world, nations suffer from security dilemma. Muhammad Ayub says, in Western countries, nations have one policy called security dilemma. But in the third world nations, third world countries, they are suffering from insecurity dilemma. So they are suffering from insecurity dilemma. So this is the difference. Security dilemma is the challenge of Western countries, whereas insecurity dilemma is the problem of Eastern countries. So this is the difference. You cannot understand insecurity dilemma from the perspective of security dilemma. Now we will see what is the difference between security dilemma and insecurity dilemma. The problem is security dilemma represents threats for the state from externally actors. Security dilemma represents external security threats, whereas insecurity dilemma represents internal security threats. West is facing threats not for from the problems of internal; they are facing problems of external. Out from outside, they are facing the problem. What do I mean by this? The West, if you look at the society was always almost consolidated. The society was almost homogeneous, unlike the Eastern countries like India, China. So this is a very homogeneous society which was consolidated. the political structure was well established, and there was certain legal institutions very well established, and the people follows law and order as per the norms which was established, which was tested from time to time. As a result, inside the countries of the third world, they were very peaceful as far as internal consolidation of the state is considered. And internal consolidation, it has happened way before these colonies has become independent from the colonial masters. As a result, they are not facing the problems internally. If there is any security dilemma in these Western countries, that is from the outside. Maybe it is because of terrorism. Terrorists are coming from outside and they are waging war on the problem. So these problems are more dominant in the Western countries. But if you look at the developing countries, at the third world countries, the problems are majorly from the internal security threats. For example, civil war. For example, religious clashes, communal clashes. For example, caste-based social differentiation, right? Caste-based social differentiation, community-based social differentiation. So the social cleavages exist in this country, political inequalities exist in this country, and then legal institutions were not established in this country. They were not tested, but they were rather imposed by the West on the East. So it is taking time to consolidate or to update themselves to these institutions, to upgrade themselves to match to these institutions. As a result, in all these third world countries, there is a huge difference between the social consolidation. So they are facing the problems internally. Every time you will see that there is civil war in the West Asia, we will see some religious clashes in South Asia, like India. And because of the diversity, also look at the diversity of the countries. They are not homogeneous in nature. Because of these diversities, there exists always a challenge internally for the country. So these countries are facing, majorly, these countries are facing problems of internal security dilemma. That internal security dilemma is called insecurity dilemma. If you are facing problems, so what these third world countries are facing today, third world countries are facing problems not only from externally, but more majorly they are facing insecurity dilemma, that is the threats from internal actors of the state, internal actors itself. So this is the difference. So external security threats is security dilemma that is being faced by the West. In East, we are not only facing security dilemma, we are also facing insecurity dilemma. Majority of the problems are from this insecurity dilemma. So you cannot apply the principles of the West towards East, because there exists a severe difference between the security aspects of both countries. More than external threats, these countries are facing internal threats. So this is what the assumption, or this is what the fact is. Without decolonizing the field of academics, so you have to decolonize. If you don't decolonize, it will be difficult to address the problems of global south. If you want to understand the problems of global south, you have to decolonize these academics, and you have to develop the perspective of the Western countries, develop the perspective of the Eastern countries or the global south countries to understand their differences, and you have to give solutions to the problems that these countries are facing. So this is what the topic is. So to conclude, this is what subaltern realism is. So today we have discussed neoclassical realism and subaltern realism. So these are the differences, security dilemma and insecurity dilemma. I think we have understand the topic. So to conclude, in realist school of thought, what we read, realist school of thought is completed by today. Tomorrow we are going to start the liberal schools and various streams in liberal school as such. Just like realist school, we are also going to look at various streams in liberal school. But to conclude the realist school of thought, what we discussed, initially we discussed the classical realism of E.H. Carr and Hans J. Morgenthau, and then we came to the point of neorealism. In neorealism, we have seen defensive realism, and we have also seen the offensive realism. Defensive realism was propounded by Mr. Kenneth Walsh, whereas offensive realism was proposed by John Mayer Schimmer. Then, as a critic to neorealism, there emerged one more school called neoclassical realism, which was led by Randers neoclassical realism, which was led by Randers Schweller as well as Farid Zakaria. And we have also seen what is this neoclassical realism, right? They gave importance to not only the structural aspects but also the human nature as well as the foreign policy, or the domestic factors. Some factors along with the structure they have given importance. So that is the difference between neorealism and neoclassical realism. And then in the end, we have seen how the academics has to be separated, that is from the Eurocentric towards the West. That it is studied in the subaltern perspective of realism. In subaltern perspective, we have seen that yes, there has to be a separate voice for the global south countries to address their challenges, because the Eurocentric models doesn't apply because of the differences in the challenges that these countries are facing, that is global south and global north. So these are the basic schools in neo realist school of international relations. So today we are done with the so-called realist school of thought, and so this was the first point or first theory in international politics that we have to understand. I think we got a very good understanding of realist school. From tomorrow, we will be starting with the so-called liberalist school of thought, and we will be focusing. I'm also planning to start in IGP part also parallelly along with this one. So if you are interested, you can subscribe to this and you can follow every day. Maybe within 30 days, we'll be completing entire syllabus of PSIR, so that it will be like quick revision for you people, and then we can also be upgrading ourselves from time to time. So this is what the lecture for today is. Thank you, gentlemen, for giving me this opportunity. Let us meet with new class some other time.